Hi there. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Crystal Wittevrongle, collaborating with Common Sense Edmonton, here today with Jackie Liu, who is running for Edmonton City Council in the pihêsiwin ward. Jackie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thanks, Crystal. It's my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to hear more about you and your background and, what you're bringing into City Hall should you be elected.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. First of all, it's a real pleasure to chat with you and to I guess the listeners. So my background is I bring a pretty diverse background and some frontline expertise to the city council. I think it's generally helpful when you have people who've done the work in positions of government. So my career has been in health and social services for about the last 20 years. So I'm professionally a pharmacist. I'm licensed as a pharmacist. I haven't run one in some time, but over the last couple of decades, I've been operating pretty large nonprofits. That's why I run community health centers. I've contracted with a huge number of nonprofit providers, both in Edmonton and in Calgary. And recently, I've been working in housing, so working directly in homelessness, funding organizations and working alongside them, to house people off the streets and make Edmonton a better place.
Wonderful. Well, what are you hearing are priorities for your ward, and on the streets and when you're chatting with people in the community?
Yeah, so our ward, so Ward pihêsiwin, in the southwest of Edmonton, is a pretty diverse place. It
Mhm.
extends, from the, sort of the very almost central Edmonton, up at the very top of Tualaga Drive, all the way down to 28th Avenue, which is essentially Leduc. So there's a huge range of issues that impact very differently depending on what neighborhoods that we're in.
Mm.
And so lots of conversations at the doors. I guess if I'll list them off. I haven't prioritized them, Crystal, but affordability is a big one for everyone. I mean, there are the basics of life that we need to be able to stay in our homes. We need to be able to afford to do things that we love, that fulfill us, and that's being impacted pretty significantly over the last few years for a large variety of
Mhm.
reasons. I'm sure people are familiar. That's a big one. There's a large bucket of conversations that I would consider community safety.
Mm.
And we can get into that in greater detail. But the way that I interpret it is, people want to be able to access their city, and so they want to be able to access public services, public spaces, public transit. And of late, the perception is that we're not able to do so safely, and perception matters, right? If people don't feel like it's accessible, then it actually is not, and so that matters as well. So those are the two, I think, very large things. The probably, I guess, trailing right behind that is just the growth of Edmonton.
Mm.
So as the city's growing, both within closer to downtown, the density is a big time conversation right now in Edmonton, but so too is urban sprawl, right? So much of my ward extends, past the Anthony Henday, which is the outer highway. In Edmonton, of course, there are many thousands of new homes, newcomers, and they have big concerns about how the service gap and the infrastructure gap is playing out in their neighborhoods. So
Mhm.
there is no lack of big issues here.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. And it sounds like the folks in your ward are definitely tapped into some of the key problems or challenges for the city. And so,
Mm,
thinking about the service aspect,
mhm.
running these public services costs money, and the city has had considerable property tax increases in recent
That's
years.
right.
What are your thoughts on that, both as it relates to increasing property taxes, but also how that translates into service?
Yeah, yeah. The value for taxes
Mhm.
conversation is very much front and center. I think I'll say most, right? Yeah, most households we have some level of conversation about value for taxes, and it's been very difficult. There's lots of folks here who are, I would say, quite established in their homes. There's people who are
Mhm.
planning retirement. Basic budgeting dictates that you need to know your expenses, right? And if people are looking at future expenses that they cannot predict, and so if the city continues to increase property taxes at an ongoing rate like this,
Mhm.
um, it's going to impact your ability to stay in your home, and that is a very big concern. And so, I guess my take on that is like. value has to happen, right? If we're paying taxes, we have to receive services for them. There needs to be a commensurate level of value, for what people are paying into. Ward pihêsiwin is, I mean, I guess I'll say this proudly. Like, I think it's maybe the nicest part of Edmonton. Beautiful homes here. There's high value homes here. Of course, the commensurate tax bills, right? And so, there is definitely a sense that this ward contributes sometimes more than it receives.
And so what is your perspective then with property taxes specifically? Like, would you be in favor of freezing
Mhm.
them or lowering them in subsequent
Yeah.
years?
Yeah. So I mean, we should always be honest, right? What I have been saying to people at the doors is that I'm not prepared to make commitments or promises that I can't keep, right? And what I say with that is, as one voice out of 12 plus one, so one voice out of 13, I think to make a promise to freeze or lower is not reasonable. I think what is important is the values of how you approach those things. And so,
Mhm.
from my background as a nonprofit operator, I've been dependent on grants, different levels of government funding my entire career. If I don't spend money well, there's a real chance I don't get it again next year. And that's
Mhm.
the attitude that the city should really have, right? And the perception that the city will just reach back into residents and taxpayers to fund additional spending, I find is not respectful of people's livelihoods, people's income. So
Mhm.
that's the value, is like we have to be accountable to taxpayers. Really open, transparent reporting, really data driven outcomes. Are
Mhm.
we achieving what we're supposed to? And it's that approach that will drive efficiency. So I wouldn't say that, yeah, we're going to cut this, because I don't think that's necessarily reasonable, especially with how we have infrastructure gaps and service gaps right now. What the absolute promise is, every bit of spending has to be scrutinized for real tangible values, not just the perceived value of what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it makes me think about spending. So, taxes are
Hmm.
one side of the equation, and then there's the spending aspect and
Yeah.
infrastructure gaps, things like this that are, very real priorities. But there's things
Yeah.
that maybe aren't as important. Are there some things that
Hmm.
you have an idea of or have your thumb on that are maybe less important spending priorities that could be reevaluated?
I think that there is so in addition to obviously taxes and spending is income, right? And
Hmm.
so, as the taxes come in, and obviously we kick a third of those taxes immediately over to the provincial government. We've got a gap in the property grants that the provincial government has traditionally allotted the cities. So there's an
Hmm.
income problem there as well. And so I think it's important to address all three of those things. So the
Hmm.
income, the spending, and then also like what revenue we're able to generate, right? So all of
Hmm.
those things in consideration. The priorities for me are, I think we're spending a lot of money filling in gaps that are supposed to be covered by the provincial government.
Hmm.
And I'll speak, my area of professional expertise is in homelessness, which then overlaps very heavily with mental health, addictions, and Recovery Alberta.
Hmm.
Um, the city spends an enormous amount of resource, if not money, then at least capital, or sorry, like human capital, on services that are meant to be provided by the province, right? And so that's
Hmm.
a gap that's really tough to justify spending for. And it's one of these things that, and I say this publicly, it may not be a city's, it's not in the city's jurisdiction to address these things, but the consequences are definitely the city's to bear. And
Hmm.
so if we're able to actually rely on different orders of government to, do their part, and look after these things, I would love to be able to centralize those resources into, essentially the things that the city is supposed to look after. The city is not,
Hmm.
the city, I think, at its core is basic services, right? I phrased it as, the city sets the sandbox for every other order of government, every private business, every landowner to really play in. We have to set that sandbox appropriately, make sure that it's running properly and efficiently. And it's tough to do that if there's holes in there, and, we're having these leakages. Sorry, I
Yeah,
almost mixed
yeah.
the metaphor.
No, no, I love metaphors. Whenever people use them,
Yeah,
I get
yeah.
real excited. But
Mhm.
but it brings me to the thought about how the province and the city work together. And there's been
Mhm.
real issues with city council and working with the province. And so how
Yeah.
would you on city
Mhm.
council work to kind of strengthen and rebuild that so that things with the province
Yeah.
and that relationship can actually, help the people of Edmonton rather than, have the issue about resources?
Yeah. You know, I've had the benefit of really great mentors in my career.
Hmm.
One of the great things I've learned is, can we take the most respectful interpretation of what the other side's trying to do? And I think
Hmm.
the most respectful interpretation is that everyone actually wants a functional society. And we may differ in some philosophy and ideology, but no one's here to burn it down. Right. And I think
Yeah.
that's the mentality that you have to go in with, is that the other side wants what you want as well. You may approach it differently, right? But there's a commonality there. And so in my career, I've had the opportunity to work with different levels of government, right? All three levels, conservative, liberal, and the NDP government for a time, right? My approach has always been to be objective and data driven. Like,
Hmm.
outcomes don't lie. Like, the math doesn't lie, right? And if we can agree on outcomes and sort of meaningful measures that we can agree on, frankly, it takes the feelings and the opinions away. And if we can
Hmm.
focus on those things, I think that's the way to approach the problem. You approach the problem, not the person, right? And,
Yeah.
and, and it's and it's true of mediation. It's true of any sort of negotiation or public discourse, right? That the outcomes are what matters, and are meant to be objective. Um, they shouldn't be partisan. They shouldn't be ideologically driven.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And that's something that, has put a thorn in the side in a lot of major cities and how their council works with the province.
Mhm.
But moving now to the infill development, I'd
Sure.
love to chat with you about that a little bit more. Like, I know Edmonton has been experimenting with this,
Hmm.
and there's been considerable issues, or at least reported issues, from residents in some of the more mature communities. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on how this policy has played out in practice?
Yeah. Um, I think that blanket anything is tough.
Hmm.
I think when we open the floodgates wide open, the market will do as the market does, right? Um, People learn it to make money, right? And so if
Hmm.
you open the door, definitely there's the opportunity for that to happen. And proper policy, I think, is meant to be enabling, not restrictive, right? You shouldn't
Hmm.
write policy, and you shouldn't be looking to public policy to tell people what not to do. You should write policy that allows people what to do. But what you say you can do cannot be everything. Does
Hmm.
that make sense? It's not how
Yeah.
you would parent. It's not how you would negotiate with someone, right? Yeah, just take what you want, right? It's not like that, right? You have to have some boundaries that tell
Hmm.
people what is reasonable and what you can do.
Hmm.
And so that's my basic position. I will say I think we need housing density. We've got last year, 70 odd thousand people moving into Edmonton. Those people need homes, right? And
Hmm.
so a mix of all types of housing is required. We've got this. There's a gap in different levels of housing, and we can have infill for probably the next couple hours, right? If we wanted to. Like I guess the way I look at it is we need housing of all types, and that's what moves the market from, at all levels, right? Because we
Hmm.
have compression. If you don't have the appropriate housing up here, where you might like it, it compresses down here, and there's less housing stock available. So we
Hmm.
absolutely need more housing stock, but we can do so in a more deliberate manner that's considerate of what people's perspectives are and what their needs are.
Hmm. And so, what would you support if you're on city council as one of
Mhm.
these alternatives?
Yeah. So I'm looking at. I mean, if you look at fundamentally what the point of density is, it's to allow people to live where they work, live where they may not be as reliant on,
Hmm.
on cars and vehicles, right? And so it makes proper sense to actually, have conditions that are, you can build when you're within this distance of established transit. You can
Hmm.
build if you're within this distance of existing amenities.
Hmm.
You can build if there is, for example, a cap on, like, per square area, a maximum number of units, within the RS zone, right?
Hmm.
Like, there are things you can do that, to be honest, I think the market kind of dictates it anyways, right? Like, no developer will build where they can't sell.
Yeah.
Um, but let's make it explicit, because I think what Edmontonians really want is some surety. Like, there are
Hmm.
conversations I've had in Ward pihêsiwin where, I mean, I think I say with reasonable assurity that there will be no infills. Again, it makes no sense, to build an infill where there's no transit, where there's no amenities and far from the core. It's not logical, but yet people still have the fear that their lives will be disrupted. So let's take that away, right? Let's make those policies make sense. Density where density, is logical and reasonable. If we're going to do some things like, not have mandatory parking, well, then we have to make sure that those folks have alternatives to driving, right? And that's only possible if you're within established infrastructure. So there's ways that we can do it better.
Well, and if we look at transit more broadly, in our opening, you discussed safety concerns as a priority for your ward, and transit safety, I would say, is definitely up there amongst people, the residents of Edmonton. And so, what are your thoughts on how the city currently deals with safety as it relates to transit in order to increase ridership as it currently stands?
Yeah, the safety on transit. The way I look at it, it's that it's one of the tips of the iceberg, right? If we're really honest, when we're talking about community safety, we're talking about people where they really shouldn't be, right? So we're talking about people experiencing homelessness who are sheltering in transit stations or on transit, who really have no place to go, during the daytime. For sure, there's emergency shelters that they can sleep at night, but during the day, there's not a whole lot of places to go. And you and I, like I assume you're in an office of some sort. I'm in my home right now. This is where I'm not in anyone's space. And if we don't have a place to go to, you're in public spaces, and that makes it it makes it less comfortable, I'll say, for people to access those spaces. And so that's the tip of an iceberg, and we have to address that entire chain. Having said that, it is vital for us to access our public spaces. Like, those systems are for everybody to use, and they're frankly, they're a major part of the solution to traffic congestion. All of our concerns that we state in society would be greatly resolved, or there would be great progress towards resolution if we're able to access public transit. So sorry, a bit of a preamble, but on that whole thing of if we could address people in public spaces, that would be obviously the best solution. In the meantime, hey, we've got some excellent pilots here in Edmonton where we have transit peace officers paired with social service agencies, moving people along, connecting to service providers, and actually taking working with them firsthand to take them to to a navigation center or to a shelter. There's examples of that right now that are relatively affordable, given given the price of law enforcement, and we've talked about taxes, right? Law enforcement's a big one, right? But there are economical ways that we can increase visible presence of peace officers and transit and social service staff on on platforms, at stations, on hubs. The visibility is I think a major part of what we need to do as a city. There's a point where the intent is, if you hit a critical mass, right, it'll feel better. We've all ridden transit to a downtown festival or to just an Oilers game or a concert, right? On those days, you don't think about it. It's a very different conversation in those days. And so like, until we reach that critical mass, having some visible presence on platform to increase people's sense of safety, and we gotta keep working on it.
So you're in favor of kind of doing more of the things that are working, but is there anything that the city's not doing that they should consider doing with regards to safety in that respect?
We're talking about transit specifically, right? Yeah. I think there's quite a few things. So, one of the things that my first experience in Edmonton was actually working in COVID isolation shelters. And we sat for lunch with transit operators almost every day. And hearing those folks talk about their experiences, deeply concerning, right? Because there's a lot we can do to support our operators and our frontline staff to feel that perception of safety. I think that there's a lot of different areas that we could look at in terms of safety for people, for operators. I'm thinking of like physical tools and rotations, but a lot of it is, I'm sorry, like, it comes down to frontline presence, right, of some form. I know that there's different conversations about turnstiles and deterrence, right? And then we're talking about conversation between in a lot of cases survival versus inconvenience. And I'm talking of people in public spaces, right? If
Mm-hmm.
my threat of freezing, the threat of someone freezing will not deter them from going into a warm space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like those are things that I think require a lot of thought, and I wouldn't put them forward as like, oh yeah, if we do this, it'll be fine. I don't think it'll be fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we can definitely consider different tools and mechanisms, right? But the overall issue is, frankly, it's more complex than just than a fair jumper. Like there's a perception that someone just just jumps the turnstile, doesn't pay. Like that is a different kind of person than I think the folks that people are concerned about.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, with fare gates, wouldn't necessarily manage that element. But is
Mhm.
that something that you'd be willing to support, like the closed fare system, even in a pilot form, on city council to see if it has any sort of impact?
Maybe. It's interesting because the other thing that would be very interesting, and you're in Calgary, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So, one of the great things about Calgary is actually the fare free zone in
Hmm.
downtown Calgary, right? And that's actually one of the things that, would actually, looking at, the vibrancy and the vitality of downtown, like those are some of the things that we should actually be considering as well, right? Is opening access. And so I don't say that as a counterpoint, but rather that I think that there's consequences to actions like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so, will it be effective? Will fare gates be effective in increasing safety? Or will it be, or will it actually have a detrimental effect to downtown vibrancy and business vitality, right?
Hmm.
And I don't think I have the answer to that. I would love to look into it. I think we need
Hmm.
to look into it as a city. And so maybe my sort of one line answer to you is I think everything should be on the table to be
Hmm.
considered. And actually, and again, going back to like objectively, what are we talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and transit safety is one part of kind of the overall community safety and public safety, which is,
That's right.
as you've said, very complex, and there's many
Mhm.
nuances to consider. Um,
Yeah.
and so at the heart of this for many Edmontonians is the relationship between the Edmonton Police Service, the Police
Mhm.
Commission, and City Council. And so
Yes.
that relationship has become quite dysfunctional over time. What
Mhm.
are your thoughts on that relationship and the breakdown of it?
Yeah. Um, I think I will start with, um, I think it's, I think things have improved. I think it's not particularly helpful to the city. I'm not saying to you, Crystal, but I think as the overall dialogue, if we keep saying it's dysfunctional, yeah, that's the perception, right?
Hmm.
It's the guilty by association. It's the writing of the headline, like, oh, they're less dysfunctional than before, implies that they were dysfunctional, and so
Hmm.
that narrative, I think, is not in itself very productive.
Mm.
And I would challenge, I think, everyone to actually like how do we have a good relationship is the exact same outcome as how do we improve a dysfunctional relationship, right? So
Yeah.
how would I go about having a productive relationship with the police? Um, I think just as before, right? Like, what is the most respectful interpretation? I think the police have an important role to play in our city. I say that, hey, I want police to be there when I call.
Hmm.
And in order for that to happen, both on a personal level, but of course on a systemic level, for police to be there when we call, we have to make sure that that they're appropriately resourced, that they're not spending their time doing things that other services or different service providers can be doing, and that they have I would say both the appropriate autonomy, but also the right amount of public accountability, because that public
Mm.
trust is huge, right?
Yeah.
There's you, you know with I think with societal things of the past half decade or so, there's strain in public trust
Hmm.
between levels of government and also with police and the general public. And so, how do we
Hmm.
repair that trust overall is really critical. So, approaching it with the best of intentions, trying to, you know, encouraging the police commission and the police to be very open and transparent about what they're doing to the public is an important first step.
Hmm.
I'll say that personally, I've had some very fruitful collaborations with police in my time.
Hmm.
I was part of of a help project that was that paired police members with social service staff. That's been a pretty significant, I think, win for the city of Edmonton. So I've been part of those things. worked with, I guess, different like agent buildings in different programs. So there's a pregnancy pathways program that I've been associated with here in Edmonton. There's supportive housing programs in Calgary that have actually relied on regular police contact. Like there is a way to do this, right? There's positive relationships that we need to build with the police in spaces that are not just crises. That would really help in that public perception of police. So I'm looking forward to that relationship, actually, and I think. There's every opportunity with what will likely be many new people in council and a new police chief to move in a really positive manner.
Yeah, and so how do you see that playing out, like in terms of maintaining the operational autonomy, but then also being, accountable democratically, like in that relationship?
Yeah. I think, I mean, I will give you my opinion, I suppose, because I'm not a counselor, right? I'm not a police commission, so I don't know if I come with the background expertise in that area, but the service mentality has to be there, and I think one of the actually, I'll say this way. One of the criticisms I've had of sort of police infrastructure, as a social service partner, is that the police generally always have to take the lead, and the shared leadership model that I felt in collaboration with the police is not how I would like it to be. And in terms of building trust, for example, with the health team that we mentioned, it's police led, right? Police resources are very different than the nonprofit sector. And when we're talking about pairing a constable at a salary of the six figures minimum plus more with a $60,000 social service staff, like there's a disparity there, and it's very clear who holds authority, right? And with the best of intentions and everything else, it's still very much we're at the police table and we're invited, and it's great, but it's not a true shared leadership model. And so if the police were to be able to reach out and actually extend the, and share like true leadership, I think with non-police partners, it would go a long way towards that public accountability. And that's what I'm saying. I don't have the nuance of the commission reports and all this, but that shared leadership, like come to our table, come look at this, and be open to feedback and criticism of how we're doing things, will be huge, right? And that's what's expected, I think, of our government, and so we should expect the same of our police.
And of that program that you mentioned with pairing the police with social serving, and you said that it was successful. What were the metrics? I'm just curious, like how was it viewed as a success?
Right. Yeah. Now you'll pardon me because it's been several years since I've been intimately part of that program. That program at the time of inception was meant to decrease frontline police demand. And so one of the criticisms of it is that, well, it actually didn't do anything except for serving the police interests to reduce the load on frontline officers. But if you say that sentence slowly, it makes perfect sense. If you decrease the load on frontline officers, they're available for everyone. And so that's a good thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's where, like, an example of that alone is if it was a shared leadership model, everyone could lean into that, because I believe that frontline officers should be there when we call. And so, that's a win for everyone if we're able to achieve those goals. And I think that's one of the things that, my recollection of the data behind it is that they were able to reduce the high frequency users, by providing these folks with appropriate social supports. They worked with existing housing programs, because I think that's one of the things we have actually not a bad network of nonprofit housing providers, but engagement is not always easy to come by. And if you're able to focus in on resources like this help team, those housing programs are able to accomplish a lot more. And so, I think there are pretty tangible impacts on reducing, high frequency users, thus decreasing service demand across the board.
Well, it's interesting because with police officers, some of the research that I've done, was that if they're doing the things that they are trained to do and that they join the force to do, they're happier, they have a better job satisfaction, retention is better across the board, just better outcomes, which results then in a circle of better policing. And so if they're able to be doing more of that, I see the connection that you're talking about there. But
absolutely. And that's not fire, because fire has it, in my opinion. Oh, sorry, I don't want to say words like this, because they may not be true, but in my perception is that the fire service has it worse than the police, because they're always the closest. They're the first to
Yeah.
respond to drug poisonings, and I think that and again, no disrespect to firefighters who are listening, but I think that the scope difference is even greater, because the
Yeah.
scope of a normal of a firefighter is vastly different from being a frontline, essentially a paramedic, right? Whereas police do respond obviously to urgent crisis situations of all sorts, right? And so yeah, supporting our frontline emergency services is absolutely critical, and the wellness of police members, the firefighters, paramedics is I cannot imagine it is anything but an all-time low given our societal situation right now.
And so with that comes like the need for potentially more frontline service staff. So would you be, as city council, would you be in favor of increasing funding to some of these agencies, or more of the partnership model that, isn't necessarily increasing the percentage of the city budget that goes to Edmonton Police Service, for example?
Right. So is the question directly, would I increase police funding? Or
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, I think that I am not able to, I think, make an informed conversation on that. I think I mean, that police budget being what it is, and the public accountability that such an enormous amount of dollars really has to be considered. So I honestly need to look into it, right? And I look forward to hopefully having the resources of city administration to actually look at that. We talked about the autonomy of police earlier, right? As a taxpayer, I'll speak entirely as a taxpayer. The police are a large administrative machine, right? Like, are all of those things going to frontline? And if there is to be a zero-based budgeting process that the city is going to put itself through, and it should, I believe strongly that the city should do this. So too should the police service, right? And so I think the answer to police funding depends on the openness and accountability to what those dollars are being spent on currently. So it's yeah.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. It's got to be, pretty consistent. If we're going to do it somewhere, we should kind of, consider it elsewhere.
Right. And let's and let's do it together. It would be a great show of respect and show of trust for public dollars if these very large services go through this process together, right? Like, no one should be above public scrutiny, right? And public accountability. Like, that is literally the job.
And I think that in most cities, at least from what I'm hearing, is people feel that that's been completely lost, is that accountability piece and the transparency piece, and just, starting from scratch with that, I think is something that these cities need to do from within city council, definitely. And kind of going into this election is a bit different, because we have political parties at the municipal level for the first time. And so do you have any affiliations yourself with any of the political parties in Edmonton?
I do not.
No? Okay. So you're running independent.
Yeah, I'll be honest, considered it, because obviously it's easier to run as a political party with the political machinery. I think there's lots of discourse on political parties right now. I think that without elaborating, it very much is an electioneering tactic, right? I mean, we've heard the mayoral candidate from one of the parties say that the party's going dormant after the election. Well, then what are you doing? Right. And, and if you ask questions, you have that full accountability, this is not a team of aligned people. Like, they're a team of people that were put together to win an election, which is fine. Right. But it's very much a mercenary activity versus like it actually a collective, a collective where everyone is being informed. And, I'm certainly not in favor of it. And, that's what we'll see what shapes out, I guess, on October 20th.
Yeah. And sometimes, like, from what I've been hearing, is it's helpful for voters in the sense of they have a very clear understanding, or at least what's positioned to them, of their candidates' values and priorities and that sort of thing. And so politically speaking, like, where do you find yourself? Like, are you affiliated provincially or federally with any parties or anything like that?
No, but Chris, I'd like to go back to that, because the sell job is that people can maybe align with a party and see that there's consistency. But I think we've seen, actually, during the course of this election, that the party doesn't agree on things. And so it really is, if internally the party can't even get their, they can't even get their branding straight, where you've got different candidates with their own, doing their own thing. They disagree with each other on issues of infill. We have issues with people not showing up to critical votes, of course, right? They're the facade of, come believe us, we're going to do this, is actually a facade, right? And so I think that, I think it's important to be honest about that conversation. And it's, if it were a real party, maybe it would work, but not this mercenary thing that they've got going on. So I think the idea may have been reasonable. And if it were drawn out, like maybe the next election, we'll see some examples of this. Definitely not this one. And so sorry. And your question is, am I affiliated? No. I think in my life, I've voted different ways based on issues, and it just goes to the objectivity, right? I think your political alignment shouldn't be making decisions with, based on the jersey on your back, right? It needs to be based on situation, based on, the leadership and the people at the table. Who supports the interests that are most pressing of the time. And there are different leaders and different politicians and I suppose different party alignments, for different times of life. So I've got this multicolored dream coat, I suppose, over my years of life, right? And so not strongly affiliated with any party, no.
Awesome. I mean, I think it's a very good way to say it, though. It's, the jersey on your back analogy that you just had of issues. But as we close out this interview, what is, one thing you'd like to leave with our viewers who may be in your ward or may not be in your ward? What would you like people to get from this?
I think that, when I leave it, so I'll treat this as a door knocking exercise. So what do I want to leave people with when I walk away from them? And the impression I want to leave is, you want someone that that will do the job and do it well and honorably, right? The expertise and the experience of the individual matters. Like, we all have glossy websites. Everyone makes campaign promises, right? And so what is the history and values of the person that you're potentially supporting? What does that look like? And do they align with yours? Right. I've said to you during this conversation, I've said to many people, like, I'm not going to make false promises, but these are the things that I stand up for. These are my values. I hope that they align with yours. We're never aligned on everything, I think, with anyone 100% of the time. I hope that there's enough alignment to earn that support from people. But looking past that, it's also, the experience and what people have done in the space, right? Not hiding behind, not hiding behind a party banner. I'm not hiding behind, slogans aside from the ads that we have on the website. No, what I am is a person-centered, like public service supporter, really invested in how the city's growing. And problems are more complex than we think they are, right? We want simple solutions, but you need people that are going to dig in and do the work. And, when people are considering a candidate, in this ward or anywhere else, look into it. Right, like these are difficult solutions. Difficult solutions are needed, and if anyone's got a simple catchphrase, either they're lying or they're trying to sell you something.
Yeah. No, that's really, really great. And it leads me into my closing notes, which relate to just getting out there to vote. 2021, there was a dismal turnout for voters. So folks, viewers, please stay informed, stay engaged, get out and vote. It matters. You have a say in how your city operates, so please utilize it, exercise that. And Jackie, thank you so much for being here with me today. This has been a really great conversation, and I really, truly appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure, and pleasure to meet you.
Yes, you too. Thank you. And thank you for watching.